Now, when you're combining different typefaces, usually you will have a different typeface for the heading versus the body. So if you're thinking about a web page, your title will usually be different from the body in terms of the font or the typeface. And this is to create slight contrast and interest in your designs. So let's look at some of the common rules that designers use when they combine different fonts. The first rule is that serifs and sans serifs work together really well. So if you have a heading that uses a serif typeface and a body that uses a sans serif typeface, then that tends to create a good design because sans serifs have slightly increased readability compared to serifs. So they're a great typeface for the body of text. Similarly, the other way also works quite nicely. If you have a sans serif heading but with a serif body, that little bit of contrast creates a beautiful design. Now, just don't mix a sans serif with a sans serif or a serif with a serif because it can look a little bit bland and undifferentiated, and hence it can look undesigned. And the other thing is that while we tend to say that two different typefaces or two different fonts will make your design look more elevated, too many fonts will ruin a good party. So if you find yourself using 3 or more fonts, then really think hard about it and evaluate whether if you really need so many fonts. The rule to stick to is that 2 different fonts will look really good. 3 is really at a stretch, but 4 is already way too many and you should be cutting down. So as we discussed with the different colors having different moods, so do fonts. And this designer actually came up with a different typeface for each of the states of America. So for example, Alaska is represented by this snowy kind of typeface, and Texas is represented by the Western typeface. So each typeface has a personality and has a mood. If you use the wrong typeface with the wrong mood for your designs, it can look incredibly jarring. So always try to appreciate the mood of the typeface. Just as in the beginning of the talk, when we compare these two love letters, appreciating the mood of the typeface is incredibly important. And if you mix together different moods, your design can look incredibly strange. For example, this one here, where you've got a, roaring 20s kind of font combined with the mechanical typeface, looks just odd and very out of place. And similarly here, where you've got something that looks like it's from Days of Chaucer versus the typeface for the Compaq Computers branding, then again, it looks very strange. So try to make sure that the era of your typefaces are similar. So do you remember previously when we spoke about the different families within the serif and sans serif families, where certain typefaces were from slightly older days versus some which were slightly more modern? If you mix different typefaces that are markedly from different eras, it can look very strange as well. But if you get the mood of your typefaces right, then you start creating some incredibly beautiful designs. So to summarize, the things that you should try to keep similar are the moods of the typeface as well as the time era. So combining something that's old with old and new with new. And the things that you should contrast is the serifness. So a sans serif heading with a serif body and vice versa. And the other thing that you should contrast is the weight of your typeface. So for example, when you're working in a word processor, you only get the choice between regular and bold. But actually, when you download fonts in its entirety, you get a whole range of weights from light to thin to medium to bold, extra thick, etc. And you can play around with these different weights, contrasting them between the title and the body to create interest in your designs. And finally, these 6 fonts, just never, ever, ever use them and stay as far away from them as you can, because no matter what you do, they will pretty much never, ever look good in design. And even if we're just designing for the neighborhood bake sale, remember that practice is everywhere. So don't relapse and go back to Comic Sans. It's not worth it, okay? And similar to the tools that I mentioned in the color theory part of the lesson, I have some really nice tools that I like to use for typography as well. There's one called WhatFont, which is a free tool for Chrome and Firefox, I believe, which allows you to essentially spy on the web pages that you come across day to day. So if you are reading the New Yorker and you're suddenly thinking, oh, you know what, that font will work really nicely for the project project that I've got in mind, then you can use WhatFont to just highlight it and see what is the typeface they're using, what's the size, what's the color, what's the line height, what's the thickness of it, what's the weight of it, etc. And it's really, really useful. Now, what if you find a font that you like? How do you go about downloading it? Well, there's quite a lot of websites that cater to font download. So font.com is one such example. But in most of them, you do have to pay for commercial use. But this website, Font Squirrel, has a whole bunch of fonts that are free for commercial use. Then I like to use a tool called Sky Fonts, which is a Mac app, which allows you to incorporate a new font into any of your applications pretty much in 2 taps. So it's a really, really easy way of starting to use some of these new fonts that you come across. All right, so that was a whirlwind tour of typography relating to digital design. In the next section, we're going to talk about user interface design and some of its intricacies relating to mobile development. So I'll see you on the next lesson.